also I had a co-director for that too. But and for that producer was the Brian, so I guess just you know, I guess it's a strange way to do the directing, and I guess that's the reason I'm here. I don't know. Okay, well, go for it.
I have no idea what the reason is why I'm here. My name's Fred Ray, and I've directed a handful of pictures. Well, actually, that's with producing and writing. I think my next picture will be my 50th for a feature. And I do most of my films in Los Angeles, although I did travel to India last year and made a picture for Roger Corman in India. And I guess that's the reason I'm here.
Hi, I'm Brian Usna, and I mostly make horror movies. I have done a few movies that have been more action genre, and I did produce George's The Guyver, probably the most recognizable picture for horror fans that I've done is Reanimator, and probably the biggest movie that I've done was Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which I wrote the story for and co-produced.
My name is Mike Jetlov. I have made only one movie, but I did it over 100 times. It's actually, I hold the unofficial Ripley's, believe it or not, Guinness Book World Record for filmmaking. 130 jobs on one movie, many of the jobs competently too. And wrote, produced, directed all the way down, or up to Keyslip, a film that was essentially a satire of my true experiences at Disney Studios, which many of us call Auschwitz or Dachau is another word. It's an interesting studio. Many odd adventures. I made a feature film that was supposed to be a tiny little low-budget straight-to-video feature for $35,000, and it grew into an interesting ego trip. Actually, all the ego jokes are taken out, but it's gone on to a strange and checkered career, and has taken me all around the world, far beyond anything I could have ever predicted from a feature film. So now I'm currently making videos, and I've been trapped on the internet for a while. More on that later. And back to you guys. Open discussion. What should we talk about? You guys are all here because you want to become rich and powerful independent film directors and producers, right?
Whatever happened to Richard K?
Richard K?
Mike and I first met when we were both making a movie for the same guy. Mike was
with
doing
the same guy.
Huh?
I don't think we made a movie for this guy.
Not for this guy. This was the kind of guy who would find talent or whatever, sort of like Jack Harris.
Yeah.
And then attach themselves.
Yeah.
And he was usually good for one movie, although he'd try to sign you for some kind of agreement that you could never move again unless he was attached to you, like a Siamese twin. And they had nice offices. And I remember Mike was editing. I think you'd already shot your film before I did mine. And Mike was editing in there. And I went in to see what Mike was doing one day. And I'll never forget this. He had like a grease pencil. And he was like drawing on the screen of the flatbed. Square. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I forgot to shoot a close-up here. I'm going to take this shot, and I'm going to blow it up and make a close-up or something out of it. I'm drawing the square where I want the optical guy to zoom in and make a shot out of this. I had never seen that before.
We needed special effects in the movie all the way through. I wanted to being the guy who did the special effects, but to show it to backers when they were coming in the office. We ran out of money for mysterious reasons, enough to say that Richard Leon K., the man who plays the slimy, embezzling, sociopathic villain in our film, who insisted on playing the slimy, sociopathic, embezzling villain, was also my business partner.
And mine.
Yeah, it's an interesting guy. Remember the comic book Joe Blissflick, the character in Little Abner, who's always walking around with a dark cloud over his head? He's very charismatic. He's great at schmoozing people, but anyway, to do the special effects in the movie, to convince backers we had special effects, it was special effects by X-Acto. I would take the 35mm negative, my handwriting is down to about 50 lines to an inch, so I write real small, that's why I have thick glasses, and drew the special effects in with lightning. Later on, I forget if Kay was saying, why do you need to do special effects? They're already in the movie. Richard, they're in the work print. they're only scratched on. They won't show unless we project the work print. It was an interesting relationship. Yes. It's also fun too. We had backers who came in saying, oh, that's a movie, but what's it going to look like on TV? So I put on a television cutout on the chem flatbed we're working on. Oh wow, it's a television film. It was an interesting fact. But what's it going to be like in the movies? Oh, let's see. And I put on the widescreen thing. My gosh, it's the same film, works both ways. How'd you do that? It's
Use that all in one lens.
Yeah, these masks actually are magical when you put them on your flatbed editing machine. It's bizarre, or the people that work. I hate to have comments about that, but what's the old one? If you had another brain, it'd be lonely. Couldn't pour water out of a boot if instructions were on the heel. Anyway, but enough about producers. I was one. Now, back to our other film. What a great intro. Yes. We're all directors.
Why don't we take some questions and see what direction that leads us to?
Yes. Well, that's not the coward's way out.
No, if ever, I should say this one real quickly. Tim Burton, one of the most amazing people I've seen, working on Batman. I think one of the reasons some people are hired, no relation on Tim, but the people I've seen in many industries often go into things based on what they apparently lack inside themselves. All the people I know who've gone into the psychiatric profession were more in need of counseling than I've ever met. People who are directors, I remember meeting Francis Ford Coppola, his mind is all over the place, his hands are going out, and somebody needed direction, it was this guy. But they always come back to wherever they were before. Directors need two apparent things, a sense of indirection, they always come back, and a sense of absolutely no fear, because if Burton knew what he was getting into on Batman, and all the vested interests, and they've got the wrong person for this and this, and he still made it work out. You've got to be absolutely fearless or have no concept of what you're actually, the enormity of the task facing you. Yeah, partially crazy. It's also more fun being an independent because you often do more than one job. And all right, I'll keep on talking. Last little bit, I went into 20th Century Fox once and they asked me what I did on this film. I said, well, I was the director. Yeah, but you don't act like a director. Well, I was. Well, who was the guy who was in there? You look sort of like him. Your brother's like, no, that was me. You're an actor? Yeah, I do everything the director tells me to do. But who was the editor on this? Well, I was. Well, who did the special effects? I did. What about this and this and this? I did it. And I worked for cheap, but I did whatever I needed to make a movie. What's your problem? Can't you work with people? I'd love to hire the best people in the world, but it was just me making this film with my own pocket money. And the reality was that I intimidated them by doing too much, number one. Number two, my character was not a director type or a writer type. It was spread out among different personalities they couldn't latch onto. Three, the most important, if they fired just one person, they fired 10 people. One. Yeah. You've got to have enough people so that the producers in charge have a sense of power. If they can't be the, quote, creatives, they have to control the creatives. It's an interesting level. Yeah, on that in there. Fine.
I've been like daydreaming.
I've been listening. I go along with the take questions since I don't see a topic listed here. What Hollywood doesn't want you to see. I don't know what they don't want you to see.
I've got
Okay.
1,000 subliminals. I've got 1,000 subliminals in my feature film. No, not all of them are known yet on the internet. So one of the three Chinese curses, may you live at interesting times, which actually means maybe so preoccupied with making a movie that you forget about the things you really need to do and experience. Two, may you come to the attention of the authorities, which I'd love to happen to my ex-business partner. And three, may someone give you your own news group on the internet with your name. So after 70,000 subscribers and 1,600 email messages, but it was interesting. Somebody posted a list of all the subliminals that she could find, but the ones that she couldn't and that no one can, one of them especially, I flickered certain frames together. Most of the subliminals are on the order of help make this world wonderful, nothing stops the creative spirit. They're all good things because I had to see this film 1,000 times over while I was editing it, so I only put in good stuff. And one of the things is a reference to the $1 million insurance policy that my esteemed business partner, Richard Kay, tried to get on my life without asking me. along with Lenny Shapiro, the president of the Shapiro Glickenhaus Entertainment. And when I brought it to their attention, when I found out about it, in California, it's legal to get an insurance policy on someone else without their permission, as long as they're a business partner. You know, you should feel honored that anybody thinks you're worth $1 million. You know, change the subject, this kind of thing. So anyway, I put it in the film where someday, if they ever released it, I could point it out to the press. But the company's no longer around, and that's another interesting story. If you find it, if anybody ever finds a copy of my film, make copies. I don't mind. I've never made a dime from the film. But the more people that see our work, the better. There's a lot of wonderful, talented people in there. Our cinematographer was Russ Carpenter. You mentioned about the close-ups. We didn't get close-ups as part of the film. Russ didn't want to zoom in. It was just too much. So I wanted having opticals made, in some cases by Jim Danforth, who was the god of special effects and stop motion.
And who can't work with people.
No, Jim is great. He should. But the trouble is, if you give somebody a budget that says it's going to cost $3,000, say, "Oh, Jim, could you do it for $1,500 and do it in half the time?" Jim is totally honest, and he gets. I shouldn't say this, but some people are difficult to work with because they won't make deals with them. But Jim should be directing feature films, but instead,
Well, he wants to.
well, he could.
He wants to. He's trying. Todd?
Do we have any independent filmmakers in the audience? Anyone? Video?
There's a Debbie filmmaker.
Well, I work for television station through animation, and I want to.
Does anyone have any questions?
It's rough. Questions? Yes, back there.
I have a question for George. I was curious, before you started work on The Guyver, if you were familiar with it as a comic book and as an animated series real well before you started working on it? Or?
Yes, actually I did. I was very familiar with it. I didn't, there is the reason, the style that I wanted to put it in for the features, because there are the number of the things that we thought about, you know, how should we make the Guyver 2 with the budget that we have to make it in the sense of, you know, that specific comic feelings. And we started out with what, 2 million?
Yeah.
Right, it's like, you know, we were like, you know, concerned in doing with like a $2 million movie, and then they wanted, you know, so many special effects in there. And we were thinking, well, you know, if we want to go really hard, really cool, you know, what the comic book is all about, then we really cannot afford to do that. But in other way, we could do it more of a lighter side and make it more of a comic as more of a comic, and then trying to go for a PG-13 rather than the R-rated. So that's sort of like, you know, what we trying to modifying from the very dark, you know, comic, the original, to a little more of a light-hearted thing.
I think another major change was that in the animation, in the comic, it's much more, you know, it's a lot of blasting and, you know, kind of major sort of Superman type of effects. And in the movie, it's more sort of Hong Kong, you know, kung fu with monsters.
$2 million film.
There's a lot of monsters.
I thought you did a fabulous job on the film.
Thank you.
It's one of my favorite films.
Thank you very much.
Low budgets are now about under $6 million. And this is for films with actors walking back and forth and talking. The moment you toss in animation and special effects, it increases your production and the tension and stress you go through by almost 10 times. It's much more difficult to film a special effects film and a fantasy than just a soap opera.
Are there any other questions?
My questions for Brian. Do you make another Living Dead movie?
You know, that's funny. As a matter of fact, I was just contacted by Trimark to do that.
Will it be like Living Dead 4 or just different?
Well, I think I would give it a title this time. I think a mistake with that third one was that I sort of got fed up with the length of the title, and I thought just what it needs is another another title. But I think it was because it didn't carry any of the characters forward or anything, and it really did stand on its own. I think it hurt it that it didn't have a title.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, pardon?
I had to convince all my friends that it wasn't another movie horror movie. that it was
Yeah,
really different.
yeah. I think it's unfortunate, you know, and especially because it had the great key art, you know, with Mindy Clark looked so terrific. I mean, even if it had been called something like, you know, Kurt and Julie, you know, kind of a, you know, as in Romeo and Juliet or something. I think even that, or what I kind of wanted to call it, but I wouldn't have dared, and then I saw they did it with that comedy. I wanted to call it Mad Love, but it's sort of the name of such a great classic Peter Lorre movie that I would never have dared to do that. But I think that would have been a good title for it. On this one, I would do that. You know, I would certainly give it a title.
What was it that you think led to it being such a good movie?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's luck. You know, a lot of it's just, you know, because every time you really try to make them good, sometimes they work out and don't. I think, you know, part of it was that John Penny wrote the story, and I think he came up with a good concept because it is so hard to do. You know, it's sort of like the second sequel to the alternate sequel to a classic. You know, and I think trying to mix, you know, we tried to make it a lot, you know, keep with the George Romero stuff. You see the Romero stuff in there, and also take off from the Dan O'Bannon EC Comics thing, which I thought that the you know, Dan O'Bannon's version was like the original EC Comics style horror movie. It was really great, and I think it's just a wonderful movie. You know, we didn't have to carry on any characters like the second one that Ken Wiederhorn did. I think that, you know, it really suffered because they insisted that he have certain actors in it and carry on characters who, quite frankly, were already dead in the first one and weren't brought back even as zombies. You know, it's okay to bring them back if they're if it's consistent. And I think, and they wanted it a comedy, and luckily with Trimark on this one, they were just trying to get it out before their window of option rights ran out, and they really didn't care much. And my concern was that it not have to be a comedy horror. And that secondly, my theory was that because it's been done so much, these zombie movies, I thought by making the main character a zombie, it would change the dynamic of it. Then the fact that you know, Tom Ranoni was able to pull together, I guess we had 5 or 6 really first-class you know, special effects outfits involved. Each one brought something special to it. But I thought there was a lot of heart to it. Mindy Clark is certainly just great. You know, she's terrific. And I don't know if you've seen her in The Killer Tongue, which probably has, it's from Spain. It's in English. It's got Robert Englund in it. And Mindy Clark plays a very interesting role in that.
Not bad.
Question?
Todd, probably more to you, but other people can comment on this. For young people just starting to get into film, wanting to start doing independent film work and stuff, what's their best route to go?
With film work, actually, when I moved to California, this is probably a little bit different than what you're getting at. But I started with student films. If you want to start making your own films, there's a lot of different avenues you can take with that. Obviously, video is an option still. 8mm cameras, although crap quality, are available if you want to make short films and learn the editing process and whatnot. 16mm cameras are available pretty cheap as well. There's plenty of places that you can rent 35mm cameras at. If you want to work on a 35mm project, make sure you really have your project down. There's several good books out that you can get. You have one.
Yeah, it doesn't tell you how to load a camera or anything. I don't know if they have them at the show here, not the last show we were at. The McFarland did have a table. But we don't have I never did a how-to book because I've read so many how-to books by people who don't seem to know how to. And you look at them and you look on the back. First thing I always do is I look on the back to see how many features they've made or how many successful features they've made where you might suggest that they get their money back. Most of the people writing how-to books don't have any feature credits, or at least as producers or directors, or they've made the worst films ever, like Renee Harmon, who has no business writing a how-to book. I mean, you might suggest that your success will be as good as hers if you follow her advice. We did put out a book which was basically on distribution. It's not a how-to book, it's simply how a diverse group of companies, why they were created, why they created their own product and distributed it, and why they either succeeded or failed ultimately. And I don't think anybody can tell you in a book how to succeed at any real level, because there's people come up and they'll say, gee, can I take you out to lunch, and I want to ask you a couple questions. I finally just, at first I was flattered, and then I just started saying, no, you really can't, because there's nothing I can tell you over lunch that's going to do you any good, unless you have a very specific question about a particular company or some clause in a contract. There's very little. It just takes a lot of doing. The best way that I would suggest to get into the business is not to go out there and think that you're going to go out and find yourself a directing job. I would go out and you're almost going to have to, in some instances, you would have to offer to intern. Concord, which is Roger Corman's company, who we do a lot of films with, they take a couple interns per movie, and that basically means you don't get paid, but you get to work on the film and observe. Royal Oaks, which is another company that we do a lot of work with, it's owned by Andrew Stevens and Ashok Amitraj. They are starting to take on interns now. I think I ran into 5 interns the last time I was there. I mean, I actually stopped a meeting and said, excuse me, who are you? And, oh, this is our new intern. And that is one of the easiest ways, because they don't have to take a chance. They're not paying you, so if you turn out to be a total idiot, they haven't lost anything. If you go in there and you want to compete for a job, there are people, nobody wants to be a professional production assistant. It's not a terrible place to start, but it's not where you want to end up. You want to get in and look around and see what you like the best. My own son went in as a PA on a show, and he found that he liked being an assistant director, which has nothing to do with directing, so don't think that. It's a paperwork job, and he became a second assistant director. And so people will gravitate toward jobs. You know, not everybody's going to go be a director. You might have to be you might want to be a grip or an electrician or something else that will actually put food on your table, because as a director you might work once or twice a year, but as a grip or an electrician or a prop person or something like that, you can maybe stay employed pretty much right throughout the year.
Question?
I can finish a little bit more on that. Friend Devin, who worked on our production, he co-starred in the film. He didn't want to be known as an actor, so he changed his name in the film, but he's actually a producer. Found out simply enough that he could go to NYU, this is back in the old days, and for $45,000 he'd eventually be able to make a student film, and he might be directing it, but he would have to work with somebody else's script and the actors that were given to him in his film class, and he would eventually come out with a student film made to please the teachers at the university, but he would have something that might be unwatchable or unshowable outside. And in some cases, in some universities, you wouldn't even have your own film anymore. The USC would own it. Versus taking the same $45,000, making an entire feature, whether it's 16 or 35, and losing it to a crooked distributor, but at least you learn a lot making the film. You make it whatever you want, and you get it out there, and you get something on your credits. In the first couple of films, well, you may lose, but eventually you start making the good ones. The advantage to going to USC or UCLA in some cases is that you meet the future Lucases and Spielbergs, maybe, although Spielberg went to out in the valley. And you meet the others who might be affiliated with you in your crews when you start getting out in the business. So it's kind of figure out if you're a good schmooze person, it might be better going to university. It's an interesting business. In my case, I just taught myself everything I needed to know. I was a math major at UCLA and only had one editing course that I passed by during my whole time there. Took an animation course, but everything else I taught myself while I was making the feature film. It's not hard. You've got the same tools that everybody else has: eyes, ears, fingers, a working mind. And if you're bright and keep your eyes open and ears open, you can teach yourself all this. Maybe in a couple of weeks. It's the people skills that take a lot longer, and learning the hard facts. I would say take a course in law something to prepare you for the business world, because when you're making a movie, your business sense can go out the window. I cannot paint a picture and do my taxes on the same day. Different parts of the brain. Same thing when you're filmmaking, when you're creating. You're in a perfectionist mode sometimes, an idealistic mode, which means you don't want to hear about what's happening behind the scenes with the accountant and other things. Otherwise, if you do, you can lose that creative spirit that's pushing you all the way through the film.
Well, you don't want to learn about distribution the hard way.
No, you don't.
That's the most important thing. Most people, making the film is the easy part. It's raising the money and getting the money back. That seems to be the most difficult part. But you can still. We were going out for a while. I didn't do them myself, but I was financing filmmakers who I thought had some ability, who were willing to do things very cheaply down in Florida and Texas for a while, and we would give them very little money. I mean, the whole budget of their movie would be about $50,000, of which we would retain $10,000 back to do a professional sound job at a lab that we were comfortable with in California, because sound is very, very, very important to have the job right for foreign territories. But some of those films are playing on TNT and on HBO and Cinemax. I mean, these are films that were $50,000 or less. We made a movie called Dark Universe, which played all the cables. Prism brought it out. It's on Laserdisc. It's been on TNT now. Turner has it. That was made for under $50,000. Now, when I say that it grossed $400,000 or $500,000 and our net on the whole thing was about $350,000, it doesn't sound like a lot of money. But if you happen to put the $50,000 up and someone gave you $350,000 back within a 2-year period of time, you'd feel pretty lucky. And there's another one, which, and I'm not saying these are great movies. I'm just saying these are films that were made for a very little amount of money and went out and made money. Jack-O-Lantern, which they call Jacko, which is running around here somewhere, is on all the cable channels, and it sold 14,000 units. That's a hit. That's a video hit, 14,000 units. The new Don the Dragon Wilson movie that we did in India, which cost us $1 million to make, may do 10,000 units. But Jacko, because of promotion and the video box, and somebody got behind it in promoting it, made a ton of dough. And it's not a good movie. It's just a movie that was made for under $50,000 that went everywhere a bigger budget movie could go, except to the theaters.
When y'all do these movies like Dark Universe, you do them with the idea of them going to the theaters, like, you know, it's so much cheaper to do special effects and all the editing on video these days.
Right, we do them all with the idea that it'll be a video post, that everything will be done on video. That makes morphing and a lot of hardline. We did tag the 60-foot centerfold for Roger Corman. And I mean, going into that, we could have never made it for that amount of money if we couldn't go on to the Harry or the Flame system or the Ultimat and do all of our hardline and traveling mats and stuff. We had composites that were maybe 4 blue screens deep. It was just one layer after another layer after another layer of effects work, which would have been very prohibitive in film. But on digital and stuff, you can actually sit there in the bay and look at it and say, okay, this is acceptable. You know, where on an optical printer, you have to keep running it and looking at it and going, oh, I can, you know, like Invisible Mom that we did, the blue screen work never came out right. And as many times as they would do it, I'd see a hole in the middle of her or something. I finally just gave up and went home on that one.
I edit on Avid, and it's just so much better than...
They're actually outputting online out of the Avid now. Baywatch, I think, is done like that.
Oh, yeah, the new systems, the new compression is almost...
Trouble is, though, Germans, that nobody wants to use it for foreign distribution because the Germans are very picky people, as we know when they started choosing countries to overthrow. They're very picky, and they're very adamant about their QC, and they will throw your QC back for almost any reason. And so the line in foreign distribution now is that nobody really wants to take an Avid online output until the Germans have accepted one, and nobody wants to be the guinea pig of the Avid output.
Well, their new system, actually, the Illusion, it's not compressed anymore. It's uncompressed digital video.
Digital, right. I met a lab up in Boston called the New Media Lab through Bob and Holly Doyle, and we've been testing it out up there. They just did 10 dubs, and each one is an original. It's quite remarkable. They compressed it, decompressed it, ran through codecs, kept adding on more titles, all the way through 10 generations, no difference. However, there are some interesting glitches that you'll get on digital video later on. It breaks up like this. It's it's a little bit different than the one you once used to get on Hide or Beta. Also, it's the Media 100 actually looks a little bit better than the Avid on the output. Although Avid, 90% of the people use those, and if you want to get a job in Hollywood, you say you work on an Avid, you get the job.
We've got an in-house.
Yeah.
Nice start.
Yeah.
Question?
My question is for Brian. Do you think you'll be given much of a budget for this new Living Dead movie?
No, they usually go about 2/3 of the last one. It's sort of a atomic half-life. But the difference is I've never done a picture where they didn't demand a 35 delivery. Although there are some big pictures, bigger pictures, like the last Honey, I Shrunk the Kids sequel was just finished on video. They never intended for it to be delivered anywhere 35. But even companies like Trimark, when they're making the low end stuff, they want a 35 negative of everything.
So there's a home for them overseas. You know, a lot of films that you would never think would, films that go directly, which surprises me about the Disney film, is because there's so many films that go straight to video here, but when you go overseas, you see them playing in theaters, and you would be surprised, if not completely stunned, at some of the pictures that are playing in theaters around the world where people are lined up to see them. We were working in Madras, and one of our actresses was a girl named Tawny McClure. And while we were in there, a prison film, a women's prison film called Chrome Hearts or Steel Bars or what was it? Cage? No, it wasn't. It was Cage something. Cage Girls or something. But anyway, it opened in theaters, and the Indians, of course, have big, huge, colorful posters. And this girl's face, looking through these bars with almost nothing on, was on every street corner. So you can imagine what the looks on the Indians' faces were when they saw her walking down the street. Because there were no white people in India, let alone girls with platinum blonde hair. I mean, if you stepped out of the hotel, you were going to get attention. And you go there and you find that these body chemistry movies with Shannon Tweed are playing at like 800-seat theaters, and people are lined up down the street to get in, which is why a lot of places that don't have any theatrical in America are wanting things in 35 millimeter, because they do business, and they would fill those seats, 800 seats a night. And what was the other really popular movie? A guy named Jet Li was just packing them in. Just the strangest thing. In that movie about the two girls that run around, they call them vampires or something with the Y in the title, that was playing there as Daughters of Dracula in giant theaters 20 years after they were actually made.
I have a question. Can a panelist ask a question? I have one for Brian about Crying Freeman. Like what's going on with Crying Freeman, and what was that like to make? And
Crying Freeman is it's a movie based on a Japanese comic book about a reluctant killer who's been under mind control from the Chinese triad gangsters, and he's their super killer. But whenever he kills, he still has a vestige of humanity, so a tear falls from his eye, and hence he's called Crying Freeman. I produced a version of it, very faithful to the comic book, that was directed by Christophe Gans, a French director. It was his first feature, and my partner was a French distributor, and it was co-financed by Japanese and French companies. It's really a great movie. It's really, but like a lot of French movies, it's beautiful, and narratively it's a bit challenged. The storytelling isn't quite as direct. If you've seen The Fifth Element, you'll know what I mean. But Christophe Gans also directed one of the 3 episodes of the Necronomicon, which I made, the first one, which is, you can see he's really a talented guy. And Crying Freeman we did up in Vancouver, and it's a little bigger budget. And what happened to it was that in Japan they took it back and released it to modest success. In France they pushed it to where Christophe Gans is now a a famous guy. It was like #1 in France. It was huge, and it was the biggest opening first-time director movie ever in France. And it did very well in Korea and all across Europe. But just like the Necronomicon, which was also done with these same partners, by the time it got to the U.S., my French partner, who controlled the whole thing financially, couldn't get the deal he wanted here. And he had gone over, we went over budget. It was about a $10 million movie, and we went over budget a couple $1 million, not because we couldn't control the budget, but because he's the kind of guy that just wants it better, and, wants to put more stuff in it, and thinks it's got to be bigger, and which is great. But what happened was he couldn't get the deal that he wanted for North America, and the bank was forcing him to take a deal he didn't want, which wouldn't have provided much security for him and also not much of a theatrical release. The way to be safe about it was to sell it off to cable and video and it come out clean, but he couldn't stand the embarrassment of that. And so what's happened is he sat back and paid off the bank slowly himself, and the movie languishes, which is really a drag. It's like I don't know if any of you know Necronomicon. It didn't come out for 2 years after we'd finished it. I think Society, another movie I did, also did. This comes from dealing with, I deal with a lot of foreign companies, a lot of foreign financing, and this is what happens. They take it home, and the U.S. market is generally the main one, but if they're not financing it by the U.S. market, if they're not happy with the deals they're getting, it comes second or third on their list of things to do. So what's happening with Crying Freeman is it sets.
Well, yeah, I actually saw a copy of it, and I thought the movie was beautiful. And
It's
why
incredible.
isn't this out? And I figured, that's what had to have happened.
Yeah, he's a crazy guy. This guy's name's Samuel Hadida. He's a nut. But he's produced some great movies. He produced True Romance. I don't know if you saw that. It's great. He's a big fan of the genre. And Christophe Gans now puts out a complete line through. The French guy actually is one of the top distributors in France. And they put out now all the Hong Kong pictures through his company. They're very much into the Japanese and the Chinese cinema.
It's becoming a bigger and bigger market now as well.
I think as people see it, and as they get used to the style and the language.
Anime now is a lot more popular than it ever has been in America.
Yeah, I know George and I have worked on many anime projects before they were, before they really hit the States. We were getting, when I did Crying Freeman, basically the Japanese company gave me a stack of comic books and said, can you find financing for any of these? And Crying Freeman just was sort of one of the best projects. And as George said, the Japanese company, there's actually about 5 Japanese companies together, said, we want to do Guyver. At one time, I think we were going to do Devilman, but that would have been a pretty tough one.
Well, now I think with the digital,
You could do it.
I think we could do it, better. And again, cloud to the 35 is the major cost. That's a major problem, trying to do with the post and video, the digital. Then once it's there, back to.
Where you can cut it in and it doesn't look like something funny's just happened.
Yeah. It's amazing if you look at the digital. I mean, I hate the digital look when you can tell it's a digital look. I think it's overused now, and it's kind of a drag. But when I remember seeing Willow recently, it was supposed to be Lucas's Star Wars in medieval time or something. It had great hopes for it. If anybody saw it, I don't think too many people did. But if you look at it again, you'll be amazed to see how poorly done the blue screens are. And this was state of the art at the time. You see the little guys bouncing. It looks like Army of Darkness with the little guy sequence of that with Bruce Campbell, which is almost embarrassing. And you realize how tough that blue screen work always was, And now with the digital compositing, it's rock solid. It's amazing.
I think we have time for a few more. You had one.
Do you see technology making life easier overall for the independent filmmaker?
I kind of think it's harder. Because it's so, because what they're doing, how can you, you know, it's really tough to compete with Forrest Gump and stuff like that. And look at what's happening in the big, you know, now the genre pictures are huge. You know, Lost World and I mean, everything that's big this year, except for romantic comedies, they're all what used to be things that people like us could do because, you know, there wasn't much competition. And now, you know, during the 80s, they took away the blood and guts and put it in all the action movies. It used to be you couldn't, you know, you got violence in the genre. Then they took action movies and made them huge. Star Wars made sci-fi huge. You know, the only one that really quite hasn't broken through is horror, but gosh, with Scream at 100 million as a retro kind of retread, it's pretty amazing. But I think the technology makes it very expensive to go out against what the bigger pictures can do. You know, it's hard to compete with the cost of digital. Eventually, I think it'll come down, but it's like Fred said, if you're outputting to video, you've limited your budget substantially because you can't, you know, it's all of a sudden a different product.
Well, in a sense, then, for somebody who really don't have much money and you know, to starting out, and if you just want to have a video, you know, final product instead of going for, you know, film, then I think you can make pretty professional things, you know, using the video, and then have some incredible special effects, even you don't really have much money, you know. So for that matters, I think it's easy for you know, the new person to get some quality work.
I think it pushes you even more into having good ideas and, you know, the old standard routines about story and characters and such, because you can't make a low-budget Independence Day, you know, because it's all spectacle. You know, a big picture can sell spectacle, big stars, and it really doesn't, you know, they can do it by just visually dazzling you. And I think on lower budgets, you got to be much more creative about, you know, figuring out what you're saying with it. You can't put anything in there that isn't really necessary because you can't afford the spectacle.
And what are you really learning from, you know, the problem that we're finding now, of course, is that there's no hands-on. You know, it used to be the guy would go out, he would build a spaceship model. And he would hang it or he'd mount it, he'd do whatever it is he had to do to get that spaceship to move in one way or another. And then if another person wanted to change a guy into a werewolf, then he'd think about how he could do that. He'd run some hoses down, and you had your hands in the work. Your hands were actually on it, and when you were done, there was an artifact left. There was something left that said, well, we had this model of this spaceship, or there's this appliance, or here was this how we did it. Now you can do all these things the same way. When I started in this business, a strip board that you would work from was done by hand, and usually do it with a pencil in case you have to erase it or change it or whatever, and you'd pick them out physically, and you'd have yellow one here, this would be daytime, and a green would be maybe daytime interior, blue would be night, whatever, and you would move them around and do your scheduling. Budgets, we used to do our budgets by hand. We used to do them with a pencil, and then when we thought we had them the way we wanted them, we'd then hand type in the figures so we could produce it. Now it's all done on computers. It's just getting like editing. So there's a whole new breed of editors coming along now who have never held a strip of film in their hands. They have never, you know, run them through the sync block and sunk up their dailies. They get them on 3/4 inch time-coded tapes and put them into the D-Vision or the Avid. And what you're losing is you're losing learning anything. You know, when you can change the shape of a person's head or something by simply painting it on a computer box, or you can build a spaceship for Babylon 5 without ever leaving the front of your computer, what are you learning other than how to run that computer? And you look at Babylon 5, those don't look like models. And you look at the dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs are very smooth now, but you don't have the same sense of feeling that you did when you knew that Dave Allen or Jim Danforth was sitting in there, and it was one guy's mind with that puppet, and that guy was playing it out one frame at a time, you know, hour after hour after hour, not even knowing what it was going to look like. Then he'd run the film, and all of a sudden this whole thing would just come to life. You don't have the artifacts now, and you don't have the ability to put your hand on the material. So if you're starting out, I would think that that is probably the best thing that comes from having no money, is that you were forced to get down in the mud up to your knees and reach down there and find find the lever on the handle at the bottom of whatever kind of, you know, swamp you're working in and pull it out. You don't have the ability to simply pay and buy your way into a fancy and expensive looking movie. You have to really work for it, but maybe somewhere along the line you'll get clever and you'll think of something smart and you'll find some new or an interesting way to do something that was actually invented in 1925, and you'll have learned a little bit about, you know, filmmaking.
Almost like the phrase years ago was, genius can work with any materials at hand. So you'll find a way if you have a talent and a kind of an inner guiding spirit. I have friends actually one friend named Mick Weinhoff, who has made an entire feature film on a Sony TR-101. I was quite surprised when he invited me out to Image Transform out in North Hollywood. He would film this up in Racine, Wisconsin. It was called The World's Most Dangerous Video. And it starred Danny Bonaducci as a guy who was picked up by a roving band of killers at a 7-Eleven and forced to videotape their adventures. So it's all point of view through the camera. He had it transferred or blown up to 35 millimeter. Come on, a TR-101, a high 8. Now, take a look. What he had done was to transfer it to Beta SP, edit down a 2-minute trailer, convince the people over at Image Transform that it was all shot on Beta SP. They made a test. It actually looked wonderful. I saw it on a large screen. It looked about 2/3 of the way up from 16 to 35. I couldn't believe it. Where are all the lines gone? Where's all the scanning? It was more than passable for most of the small theaters that we have in Los Angeles. And nowadays you can shoot something on DV, and which is as good as Beta SP as far as I can tell, and give it a film look if you really want it. To my mind, adding grain into a film, you go through 6 or 7 generations of video and you've got the film look. It's
Actually, you know, I don't even. They do have programs to add a film look, but you know, I did one thing that didn't go out to film because it wasn't a film, and it was last fall. I did a CD-ROM game for a Japanese company, and it was an X-Files type thing with little aliens and, you know, lots of layers of mystery. And what they wanted was a half hour or so of live action to put with this mystery game. It's for Sony PlayStation. And we eventually shot about an hour's worth of stuff for them, and it was my first experience shooting on anything except a you know, film camera, 35 camera, and it was done on Betacam. And I found that by, you know, with, you know, if you use your lighting creatively, it looked great, you know. And you could go so much more extreme than on film, because when you're shooting a movie with film, there's sort of this tyranny of the light meter that the DP has. And you can say, gee, I think we want it, I'd like it a little darker, I'd like it like this. You'd say, well, I don't know. Well, I don't think we can, nope, we got to do it, you know. And I'd say, well, I want the guy to walk over here and say, well, he's not lit over there. Can I have a light? Well, it's going to take 30 minutes to move the light. No, you didn't tell me you were going to do that. You know, and there's this whole process of making sure that it looks like a movie and it's not underexposed and this type of thing. And then you watch the dailies and you go, God, it's all overlit, you know. But on the other hand, with this video thing, with this Betacam, and I guess now they have DigiBeta and all this digital camera stuff, you know, you've got to monitor right there, and when the DP says, no, I don't think you say, no, just go ahead and move the light. What you see is what you get. And you can get pretty extreme. Of course, with the CD-ROMs, they are willing to accept anything, you know. So it's in a way, it's much looser. I think the CD-ROM and the DVD and this type of programming, except for the fact that it's on a small, you know, a small medium, to me, it's kind of almost seems like where video was when I started making movies, which was in the early to mid 80s. Video was exploding, and the big companies hadn't discovered that it was a cash cow yet, and so companies were actually buying movies from the big studios to put out on video, and they were putting anything out on video, and it really drove filmmaking for about 5 or 6 years in the mid 80s. There was just an incredible number of different types of independent movies booming, you know. And since then, more than the technology making it tough to make movies, it's the fact that it's become monopolized. and now they've moved the big distribution companies are owning the theater chains again, and it's become such a huge deal with just a limited number of companies. It's really hard to make it on a low-level independent. But in the CD-ROM and DVD area, it's wide open again because nobody knows how to make any money at it. You know, they sell the games, but it hasn't focused in the way video took video. I guess, I don't know, 6 years from the late 70s into the mid 80s to become the boom it was. And I found that working on this CD-ROM. Nobody cared what I did. You know, whatever I wanted to do was okay. Whereas when you're making a movie, my God, everybody's got their lists of who can be in it and what elements need to be there, and they're very, very concerned.
Well, I think that's about it for us. 2 minutes?
Yeah, well, this one and a half. I still think that...
One last question.
For Fred, what is the strength of the foreign markets today for like low-budget genre pictures?
I would say that for the low-budget independent stuff, the foreign market is very, 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 very important right now. And I think that's probably why you're not seeing as much horror stuff being made, because America's still pretty strong, or can be strong, for a horror film, but a lot of foreign territories are really, really squeamish and gun-shy about certain things that
Americans
let
make the loudest films in the
BC.
world.
Well, it actually has to do with the fact that the foreign, we had our cable and TV boom here years ago, and Europe had all this control over television. And what's booming in Europe right now is television and cable. And cable and television has a much lower threshold for harder material. And when it was video, it was very loose. And right now, everything that's financing the pictures internationally are much softer. It's much more family-oriented.
Yeah, Japan used to be a really good country for really bloody films until that guy went off with that, the McDonald's or something. You know, and that usually, in Europe or in overseas, a lot of times, you know, a small incident of just a few hundred people being shot at a McDonald's will change the whole country's point of view. Not here, thank God, but they'll actually back off and they won't want to see something for a while, and all of a sudden the Japanese decided maybe they weren't, all that blood and gore wasn't, you know, good for them. And the Germans, and a lot of times, you know, people who mean nothing here are big stars overseas. There's a guy that we make films with. We did a Western, and I'm doing a submarine movie now with a guy named Michael Dudikoff, who in Germany was pulling down $350,000 for the home video rights for a Michael Dudikoff movie. Because the first thing we said is, why are we paying this guy so much money? I mean, this guy was like getting $600,000 for 12 days on an 18-day movie, and we kind of wonder, you know, and we tell people, oh, we're making a movie with Michael Dudikoff, and they go, who? You say, oh, well, also there's this country singer named Randy Travis in there. Oh, Randy Travis, and you know, and you kind of go and just shake your head, and you don't know why. But Don the Dragon, Wilson, and people like this have names overseas, and there's a lot of money to be done over there. American home video right now for the independent guy is really lousy. TV is okay here. Television is where a lot of money for independent stuff comes now. People will pre-buy pay-per-view. Where they're getting rid of that stuff, I don't know, but we're selling it to them. And usually we're getting the cost of the domestic rights back out of TV, and you just give the video away on these smaller pictures for whatever you can get.
I think that about wraps it up. Everyone to the left of me will be doing an individual panel at some point over the course of the convention. And I think there's one more panel like this one. It's called When Tinseltown Becomes Holly Weird, I believe. So that's all coming up over the weekend.
Look at the back of your badge.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Are you bloody films until that guy went off with that, the McDonald's or something. You know, and that usually, in Europe or in overseas, a lot of times, you know, a small incident of just a few hundred people being shot at a McDonald's will change the whole country's point of view. Not here, thank God, but they'll actually back off and they won't want to see something for a while, and all of a sudden the Japanese decided maybe they weren't, all that blood and gore wasn't, you know, good for them. And the Germans, and a lot of times, you know, people who mean nothing here are big stars overseas. There's a guy that we make films with. We did a Western, and I'm doing a submarine movie now with a guy named Michael Dudikoff, who in Germany was pulling down $350,000 for the home video rights for a Michael Dudikoff movie, because the first thing we said is, why are we paying this guy so much money? I mean, this guy was like getting $600,000 for 12 days on an 18-day movie, and we kind of wonder, you know, and we tell people, oh, we're making a movie with Michael Dudikoff, and they go, who? And you say, oh, well, also there's this country singer named Randy Travis in there. Oh, Randy Travis, and you know, you kind of go and just shake your head, and you don't know why. But Don the Dragon, Wilson, and people like this have names overseas, and there's a lot of money to be done over there. American home video right now for the independent guy is really lousy. TV is okay here. Television is where a lot of money for independent stuff comes now. People will pre-buy pay-per-view. Where they're getting rid of that stuff, I don't know, but we're selling it to them. And usually we're getting the cost of the domestic rights back out of TV, and you just give the video away on these smaller pictures for whatever you can get.
I think that about wraps it up. Everyone to the left of me will be doing an individual panel at some point over the course of the convention. And I think there's one more panel like this one. It's called When Tinseltown Becomes Hollyweird, I believe. So that's all coming up over the weekend.
Look at the back of your badge.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.